Good morning, everyone. Etla Economic Research would like to welcome you to this webinar called Artificial Intelligence in the Working Life. Today's topic is nothing less than science of success. And as a special guest, we have Dr. Fabian Braesemann with us, straight from Oxford, UK. Warm welcome, Fabian. So I can promise you already, extremely interesting morning. Today's event is a part of a project on the impact of artificial intelligence. The research began in 2023 and it is supported by the TT Foundation and conducted by Etla Economic Research. In a short time, you will have a chance to listen to Dr. Braesemann, and he will present the 6 most important motivational dimensions in using generative AI. But first, we would like to present to you some brand new research results. Our researcher, Dr. Otto Kässi, has done some interesting work concerning the effects of ChatGPT on job demand in the network platform job market. So before we enter into the science of success, a couple of words about our research project and the effects of the AI. So Otto, please, would you give us the details?
Well, thank you, Tytti, and thank you to everybody who's tuned in online. So this is joint work with several people, my colleagues Ole Teutloff and Johanna Einsiedler from University of Copenhagen, Fabian from Oxford, Pamela Mishkin from OpenAI, and Maria Del Rio Janona from UCL. And we gratefully acknowledge the funding from TT-säätiö. In this work, we built on a stream of previous papers that have studied the exposure of occupations to generative AI. And some of this work has been done by my colleagues in Etla, including Antti Kauhanen and others. So what they do in this work, they basically look at the share of tasks done in different occupations and what share of those tasks could like feasibly done by an AI agent instead of them being done by a person. Generally what they find, the general finding actually in most developed countries where this thing has been looked at is that about 1/5 of workers work in such occupations where about half of the tasks in a job could theoretically be done by a generative AI, a large language model agent. While at the same time, there are very few occupations that would be completely unaffected by generative AI, but also very few occupations where we could just take the person out of the picture and introduce an AI instead of a person. What's important to understand that all of these studies, they concentrate on the technical feasibility of generative AI, of using generative AI in the workplace. And they do not take into account whether it's actually economically feasible to replace the person with a generative AI agent. So what we do in this research, in this paper, we build on top of the previous work, and we actually use real labor market data to understand the short-term effect of what's happened to different types of work after the launch of ChatGPT. We use data from an online freelancing platform. Think of a platform this platform as a place where there are thousands of new jobs on a daily basis. There are tens of thousands of workers who apply for those jobs. They're on a freelance basis. The jobs are transacted fully digitally in the sense that the hiring process happens digitally and the delivery is digital. So you would expect that the frictions related to AI adoption would be minimal compared to traditional face-to-face labor markets. And we think of and we also we're in a lucky situation that we observe the quite a few things about the labor market that you wouldn't necessarily observe in a traditional labor market. And we think of this platform as sort of like a petri dish, where we see what happens when you unleash the generative AI into the wild. You kind of see what the impacts to different types of jobs are. And this is what we're looking at. We're using this data to understand what the actual effects are. And we're by far not the first people to think of this idea. We are aware of four other papers last year that came out that do a very similar exercise to ours. I'll explain later how we contribute over those and why we think those papers actually give a slightly limited picture of the whole impact of generative AI. In a little bit more detail, what we do is that on a daily basis we observe new job postings on the platform. There are, as I mentioned, thousands of them on a daily basis. Then we use metadata on the job postings, basically, skill requirements. On each of the job, there are sets of, we want somebody who's skilled in Finnish-Swedish translation, or we want somebody who's skilled in web development and programming in certain languages. We group these similar jobs into clusters using an AI, using a machine learning method. We end up with 208 clusters. You could think of these as 208 occupations. One would be a mobile developer occupation. One would be a writing occupation. One would be a graphic designer occupation. And then using a combination of human manual labeling and ChatGPT, we then label each of these clusters into 3 classes. The classes are substitution, which means that you could just take out the human and puts in an LLM instead of the human. And then the augmentation would be a job where you couldn't take out the human, but a skilled human would be able to increase their productivity by quite a bit if they get help from an AI model. And the third group is unaffected. It would be something that where you don't get anything. You don't get any help from an AI to do your job. We're building on, in this part of the paper, we're building on an OpenAI research paper that came out last year that basically did the same thing for occupation groups. But instead of occupation groups, we used the clusters we came up with using our own methods. Here's to give you a little bit of understanding what these 3 clusters, substitution, augmentation, and affected, look like. On the red, you see the substituted clusters. You see they're predominantly writing, and actually writing and translation. And actually, one thing I wanted to mention, one of the tags there is the SEO writing. So that's the type of writing you actually do to get your website to rank high on a search engine and set of search engine results. So that's actually writing that's meant for computers to read instead of humans to read. And you also have like proofreading, copywriting, that kind of stuff. Here in the augmentation cluster, that's very much coding or tech. You have a few non-coding related tags there, but it's mostly, you could think of like somebody who works in a software development company or needs help with their coding or website development, that kind of stuff. And the third unaffected group, that's either communication, lead generation, which is sort of like you could almost like a customer service role, something where you need human contact to another person, or also graphic design. At the point we're concentrating on the point in time, launch of ChatGPT when it was only a text-based. It was only a text-based service. You couldn't use it to generate graphics during the time that we're concentrating on. But actually, any of the results, we just throw out all the graphics-related jobs, we get basically the same results. So it's not driving any of our results. Here's what the data looks like. After we lumped all the job postings into these 3 groups, this is what it looks like. You see the vertical line in the end of November 2022 is the launch of ChatGPT. And what you see is that the number of new job postings in the unaffected cluster and in the augmentation cluster went up. and if you squint, you might actually have to squint quite hard because it's hard to see in this scale. The substitution cluster, the number of jobs in that cluster went down a little bit, but that's minimal in comparison to the growth into other clusters. So what this shows us is that the structure of the labor demand changed after the launch of ChatGPT. There's much more demand for augmented and unaffected jobs compared to before. Another way to look at this data is this. This might be a little bit difficult to understand, so I'll spend a few minutes on this. First, we've demeaned all the number of new job postings in the clusters so that everything's centered at 0. Then we took out the seasonality effects, any things like dips around Christmas time when people have the holidays, that kind of stuff. We removed from the data, and then we take a difference between the unaffected cluster and the 2 other clusters, and that's what we plot here. The difference between unaffected and substitution clusters is the sort of the blue lines, and the green one is the difference between augmentation and unaffected clusters. Here what you see is that there's no difference from 0 prior to launch of ChatGPT. So we kind of like the 3 groups seem to have moved in tandem before ChatGPT was launched. But after ChatGPT launched, what happens is that the unaffected cluster and the augmentation cluster sort of like take off on a trend of their own, while substitution cluster decreases in relative size, and that's why you see those sort of like the bars going below 0 quite a bit after the launch of ChatGPT. I remember, prior to ChatGPT launch, the 3 groups move in tandem. After the ChatGPT launch, the share of substitution cluster goes down. And we're not aware of any other things happening at the same time that would be driving these results. So we very much we think this is attributable to the launch of ChatGPT. It's really hard because we don't actually see what's happening inside the firms who are the employers or the labor market buyers of labor on this labor market. It's really hard to understand what's going on inside the firm, so it's kind of hard to give a good understanding of why this is happening, but this gives us at least some idea of that. If we rank the clusters into different deciles, different 10% chunks based on how much the labor demand changed after the launch of ChatGPT compared to before, we get this table. I'm only showing the first and the last decile. The 10% with the largest reduction in labor demand are, so this is relative to baseline, this is like the labor demand going to about half. These are the kinds of jobs that are characterized by skill requirements such as translation, SEO, search engine optimization. That's the thing I mentioned earlier, which is the writing texts for search engines to read, localization and ad copy, that kind of stuff reduced by far the most. While on the other hand, if you look at the decile with the largest increase, where we see like 25-30% decrease compared to baseline, we see the skills we see there are artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, API integrations, analytics, database development, chatbot development. So these are relatively more challenging coding tasks and also tasks that are related to AI adoption in the workplace. Things like, you want to build a new app that uses that has some sort of a large language model in the background. You need someone to do that for you, and you need to hire a person if you don't have that skill in-house. So that's what we see here. And it might also be the case that you're building firms that are integrating, instead of building new products, you're integrating existing integrating some sort of AI capabilities into their existing code base or product base. That would be something that we see here. And those are seem to be like these types of jobs where firms need these skills and hire them on the platform we study would be the ones that would be the ones that drive the increase in demand compared to the baseline. Concluding, we remain after completing this study, we remain quite sanguine about the possible. We don't see any job apocalypse coming in the near future due to current iteration of generative AI. If anything, in the market we study, where we expect the impact of generative AI to be relatively large, even here we basically see that labor demand increased, and it increased more in clusters that did not face direct generative AI competition, and in jobs that benefit from generative AI. On the other hand, we do see negative effects for some groups. We do see them for groups that are basically writing relatively simple texts, that kind of stuff. But on the whole, like, the net effect is small. Even if we see a substantial reduction in these jobs, the net effect is really small. That's because if you think of the blue ribbon, that's a small fraction of the total labor demand, and this is a fraction of that fraction where we see the negative effect. And so that's why the effect as a whole remains positive. So as I already mentioned this, but our findings do not support the narrative of widespread job loss due to generative AI. Obviously, I need to conclude with a caveat, which is that we only study the current iteration of what the generative artificial intelligence looks like. So if there's some sort of an additional innovation, disruptive innovation that some people believe in, then it might be a totally different story. But so far, we see no evidence of a large-scale job destruction due to generative AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Otto. Today's Etla policy brief is already available on our website, so please feel free to load it and read it there. It's in Finnish. So now it's a pleasure to introduce to you a social data scientist who works as a departmental research lecturer in AI and work at the Oxford Internet Institute, University of Oxford. His research has been published in leading academic journals, and it has been covered in national and international media such as the Washington Post, Business Insights, The Times, Die Zeit, and many more. Besides his role at Oxford University, he is the managing director and co-founder of the DWG, Datenwissenschaftliche Gesellschaft Berlin, a technology company specializing in social data science. So, Dr. Fabian Braesemann, we are very happy to have you here. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Didi. And thank you so much for everyone online joining us for this event. And what I would want to present to you today is brand new research we have just been submitted to an academic journal on the topic of human trust and artificial intelligence, and the paper is called Who Uses Generative AI, How and Why? And it is a cluster analysis on the motive, perceptions and use patterns of ChatGPT. This is joint work together with Christoph Gerling, a doctoral student from the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society in Berlin, who's the first author of this study, as well as Professor Tim Teubner from the Technical University of Berlin and the Einstein Center for Digital Future. So the question we are investigating here really follows on what we just heard from Otto in terms of the labor market effects of generative artificial intelligence. And the idea is, obviously, everyone knows Gen AI can hold quite a lot of potential to change many things in the workplace in various organizations, be it from governmental services over to anything related to various chatbots, manuals and other tools within any kind of industry and organization. However, for people to make use of the software, to actually apply it in the workplace, they need to trust the software. So the question that many people will have, should I trust or not trust the software itself? So in order to drive the adoption of generative AI in the workplace, we need to understand what makes people actually use or not use the technology. So why is that of importance at all? Obviously, we have heard quite a lot about hallucinations, fake information, or just imagined information, and all kinds of other kind of drawback that come with ChatGPT these days. And this all could lead to a situation where people will not trust the software and then actually refrain from using it. In order to understand what actually makes people adopt the technology, we're asking in this study here, what are the user archetypes along with their motives, perceptions, and attitudes in the usage of ChatGPT? So really trying to understand, is there different user groups, and if so, what is characterizing about these people in making use of the platform? Before we talk a little bit more about the theoretical framework, which is very important to understand what we have then done with our empirical analysis, I just want to come back one more time to the idea of what is generative artificial intelligence in the first place. So from a user perspective, what an AI should do, or any other kind of technology in this regard, it should take data as input that comes from somewhere. This could obviously be image data, it could be code, it could be anything else. The user will not very much about this. Then it goes through this black box algorithm that you see there in the middle with just this little black box. So there's some learning happening from the data. And then this learned knowledge should be used to solve a task. And this is really what the user will just care about mostly. And what needs to be distinguished is two forms of AI. On the left-hand side is what I have been calling the discriminating AI. So this is the standard stuff we all got used to over the time. This is suited to classify and predict from data. So think of things like the Google search engine. We just trust it usually, or Google Maps, for example, or any other kind of navigation service that just allows you to go from A to B. So it classifies what you're looking for and predicting from that data, as well as any other kind of prediction task. And on the other hand, we have this novel development that everyone is kind of keen to hear more about, which is generative AI. And this is really suited to generate new data. So in contrast to just predicting from given data, it will generate new data in forms of text or images. Now coming to the overall idea, what is known from the literature and from technology acceptance in the past about how people build trust and eventually start using a technology. There's three main building blocks. So on the left-hand side, we have motives for or against the use. Then we have the acceptance of that very technology, and then the use of it. So this is like a three-layered process, if you want to think about it like this. And with it comes certain kind of elements within the individual user. So on the left-hand side, we have something around belief. So will the person believe in the capability of the software? Then there are intentions of using it, and then actual behavior. So this is a very simplified version of the overall technology acceptance model. However, you can spell this out in much more detail as we did here for our study. I spare you the details, but let's look into this just for a minute so that you better understand where we're really coming from with our empirical analysis here. So this is the same visualization we just looked at before. This time the motives are here in green. You see 5 different groups of motives. Then you have the acceptance right in the middle, and to the right you have the use of the technology, here all really applied to conversational agent, that is things as ChatGPT. And these motives can be spelled out even more. So we have functional motives. This is all around the functionality of the tool. Is it really doing the job that you want it to do? You have social motives. In this particular case, do you conceive or perceive the interaction with the agent as a social interaction, like a conversation? Emotional motives, so is it more or less fun to use that technology? Quality motives, this is it really good in what it's supposed to do? Is it really delivering good answers? And relational motives, building up a relationship or trust with that technology. In the literature, this is all spelled out in much more detail, so there's all these different elements in them. I can spare you the details, but you can obviously feel free to check the recording afterwards if you want to look into this in much more detail. And all of these individual aspects, as well as individual factors such as sex, age, employment status, and so on and so forth, knowledge of AI in general, and trust will have an influence in how far you will be willing to apply technologies such as ChatGPT in your own working. And all of this did build the concept for an online survey we conducted. So what we did in the empirical part to really understand in how far there are different user groups and motives related to ChatGPT, we conducted an online survey with 344 individuals online with a platform called Prolific. So this is kind of a bit of a more text-heavy, bit of more digital interested community of people. And we gave them these 47 individual items that are all covering these different aspects we just heard about the different motives, about acceptance and the use of ChatGPT, as well as demographics and trust-related questions. So once we got the data from these individuals, what we did in a first step, we conducted a so-called exploratory factor analysis. Without going into too many details here, what a factor analysis really does, it tries to condense the information that is given in the individual questions into latent factors, into the latent dimensions that seem to be there and covering the outcomes of the individual survey respondents. And what it helped us to gain here is the number of factors that really describe the typology of the users. And it turns out there seem to be 6 individual factors, 6 individual aspects that are of importance when we talk about the acceptance and usability of ChatGPT for individuals within the workplace. Once we got this, we went on one more step to really trying to understand the individual user groups, and what we did is a so-called cluster analysis. It is actually a 6-dimensional space here, as we have these 6 individual factors, but obviously here, for simplicity and usability, we can only display to you 2-dimensional representation. What you can see, essentially, every dot here representing individual users, and what comes out of it is a segmentation of the whole data set into 4 different groups. So we find 4 clusters of users. And last but not least, once we got these 4 user groups, we profiled these clusters and really tried to understand what are the characteristics about these user types, which you would then need to address individually with your technology adoption strategy within your industry or organization. So coming to the result, this is how they look like. This is all the questions, all the items we asked the individuals. We will look into the things in more detail in a minute. And what you can see there on the right-hand side is 6 different factors. And the numbers there represent the so-called factor loadings. This means how much does each and every of these items, each and every of these variables contribute to each individual factor. And the variables that go together into one factor seem to be correlated with one another. So that the kind of questions that are responded by the survey participant in a similar way. So let's look into this in a bit more detail, focusing just on the first factor here. So I have highlighted for you here in the middle the individual variables. So what do we see here? It is all questions related in some way with the utilitarian value that people get out of this, using ChatGPT. So for example, we have things like, I am happy with the response that I get from ChatGPT. It fulfills my expectations. I perceive it as competent and effective. It performs overall quite well. It is actually better than what I expected. It is capable, and I feel comfortable in using it. So all of this has somehow to do with the value that you would get out of using it. So they all go together, these variables, forming the dimension of utilitarian value, and there is similar kind of results for all the other factors. Factor 6, for example, here at the very bottom, is about privacy concerns. So what do the different dimensions look like? We see it here on this next slide. So what we see here on the horizontal axis is the different typology dimension that is our factors. So we have utilitarian value that we just looked at. So in how far does the technology really help you doing what you expect it to do. Then we have hedonic value, which is all variables around how much fun is it to use the technology. We have specific job utility, so in how far is the technology able to solve the really specific task you want to get solved. That might be finding information about a programming related question, for example, or what we just heard from Otto, maybe anything related to search engine optimization or any kind of writing. Then perceived social presence. So this is those kind of questions relating to the idea that the conversation with ChatGPT is actually a social interaction. Maybe you ask the tool to tell you a joke or these kind of things that we heard about quite a lot, or write you a poem. Then the fifth category is trust in AI. So in how far do people actually trust the results that they get out of the technology? And last but not least, the privacy concerns. And all these 6 dimensions now describe the different user types we have, and we plot them here in this plot by the so-called factor scores on the vertical axis. So this can either be positive or negative. This is all leveled around 0, as we just saw similarly in Otto's visualization, and what we see is 4 groups really stand out. As you can see here, these individual lines and dots represent the 4 different user groups. So we have a blue line, a green line, a yellow line, and a purple line. And starting from the top line in blue, this is the group of AI enthusiasts. Then we have the naive pragmatics in green. We have the indifferent majority in yellow and the reserved explorers in purple. And if we look into the results in a bit more detail, we really see how we came about these cluster names. So starting with cluster 4 on the top, the AI enthusiasts. So if you look into the score these people have on average on these different dimensions, you see it is individuals who give a lot of utilitarian value, or see a lot of utilitarian value with the technology as a hedonic value, specific job utility, and perceived social presence, as well as trust in AI. So these are people who really use AI a lot. They think this is great, this nails it, I want to use it, and they have moderate privacy concerns. In contrast, looking at the very bottom, we have the reserved explorers. They perceive the technology very differently. So those are people that don't see much value in it. Neither they perceive it as fun, nor do they see it as doing much to solve the job that they actually want to do it. They also don't enjoy the social interaction with ChatGPT a lot. Their trust in AI overall is relatively low, and they have, compared to these answers, relatively high privacy concerns. The indifferent majoritarians are somewhere in the middle. So on average, they are kind of really not in the know that much whether they should like it or not. And the green group is the naive pragmatics, also consisting roughly 1/5 of the overall survey population. They see some good value in it. They don't like the social interaction that much, and they have very limited privacy concerns. So we can really see 4 different groups stand out, and they need to be distinguished. Now, coming to the final result of our study on the next couple of slides, we went on trying to profile these clusters. So what is really standing out, and how far do these clusters compare with one another, and how far are they different? So here on top we have our 4 user archetypes again: the reserved explorers, the indifferent majority, naive pragmatics, and the AI enthusiast. And what we see in terms of scores we just discussed, so they really differ quite a lot, but also in terms of demographics, without looking into the numbers in too much detail, what we can see is that, for example, the AI enthusiasts on the very right, they have relatively high AI knowledge, they have an overall very high trust. This is people that are often in full-time employment, a largely male group, and relatively old group of people. So this is really kind of the heavy users. Then we have the naive pragmatics. This is more of like an early job or student kind of population who don't have many privacy concerns, are somewhere in the middle. We have the indifferent majority overall across the board, and we have the reserved explorers, which is a group that has not much AI knowledge overall and also relatively low trust value. So this is the people who are really rather skeptic. And based on the user demographics, as well as the scores we identified from the factor and cluster analysis, these different user types need to be addressed differently if you want all of these different individuals to use the respective technology in your organization. So what would be the targeting strategies then for these different user groups? It would be 4 different ones. So the reserved explorers on the left-hand side, for example, as we know, they are very skeptic. They have high privacy concerns. They don't see much value in using generative AI. They're rather reluctant to do so. So what you would want to do if you want them to on board to the technology, you should rather utilize it as a static tool, maybe certain AI enhanced features, so that they don't really even see, oh, I'm interacting with the technology here, I'm interacting with generative AI. Maybe you can give them some nudges that stimulate new prompts and tutorials so that they feel comfortable with it. And also, very importantly, for these kind of people, you need certificates. You need something warranting this is something really good and useful, and you need to make them trust in the software itself. So maybe the inclusion of authorities that could be whatever, this is approved by this quality mark. The indifferent majority is somewhere in the middle. So they would be more open to use certain generative AI or ChatGPT features, and you need to demonstrate these kind of people, these folks, the versatile application that they are, and also be aware they have relatively high privacy concerns. So allow them anonymized use, make sure the data isn't being shared to some servers out in the web, out in nowhere where the data is getting lost. The naive pragmatics, however, they are much more keen to use the technology. They don't have many privacy concerns. The problem there is obviously you want these people to use the software with a certain amount of critical thinking. You would want them to make sure certain fact-checking is there so that they're not just blindly copying what they see online. And then the AI enthusiasts, these is really your friends, these is really kind of your allies in making the software available at a large scale. This will be the heavy users, those that would willingly contribute to forums, to support kind of questions and these kind of things. So there you should give them a wide range of support possibilities and allow them to use the technology in their daily routines as a virtual assistant. And likely so, what we found from our analysis here, if you cut all the dimensionality down to just these two axes here, on the horizontal one we have functional emotional motives of the adoption of the technology, and on the vertical one you have social relational motives. And then suddenly our groups form this nice 45-degree angle here in this dimensionality. So we have on the bottom left the reserved explorers with relatively low values, then the indifferent majoritarians in the middle, and then on the top right the naive pragmatics and the AI enthusiasts. So the group on the top right, they really perceive ChatGPT a useful and fun thing to do, and they can build up a social relationship and trust to that technology. The indifferent majority is somewhere in the middle, and the reserved explorers really score relatively low on them. So if you want to make these groups below the bar move up, you need to deal with privacy concerns. You need to make sure the software is actually doing what it's supposed to do and fulfilling the job. And summing it all up and summarizing it, our study, who uses generative AI, how and why, a cluster analysis on motive, perception and use patterns of ChatGPT, we find three things. So we first of all developed a theoretical framework to describe the trust and adoption of generative AI technologies by extending established technology acceptance models. We find empirically that 4 different user groups need to be distinguished. That is AI enthusiasts, the pragmatics, the majority, and the reserved explorers. And in order to make tools such as ChatGPT or generative AI solutions in general a versatile, applicable tool at the workplace in different applications in different industry and organizations, policymakers and the industry need to tailor these AI tools to these different user groups in a way that emphasizes the value and mitigates existing privacy concerns. So this is it from me. Thank you so much, and looking forward to a discussion now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Braesemann. Much appreciated. I wish you stay here, please, with us for a while. Now, if you have any questions, dear audience, concerning this keynote or previously introduced research results, now it's the time to ask them. So please write your questions and comments on chat, and we'll take them from there. But before that, I have a small surprise for you, because I'll ask now here our researcher Otto Kässi also to come here, and our research advisor Dr. Petri Rouvinen also here from Etla to join us. I think, Petri, you definitely have some questions or comments for the guys. Please. Oh, you have.
Oh, most certainly. Thank you, Otto. Thank you, Fabian. And indeed, congratulations on the first paper where you are both authors, and on Fabian and your colleagues on the second one. They are, I'd say, both rather crucial contributions to the discussion on generative AI. And let me make this point more clearly. So on both, on the first paper, I would say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I would say the market you look at is of the type where you should feel the effects of Gen AI the most. And I see 3 reasons. First, the type of work that's there, and then these are already tasks that are outsourced, so they are sort of pulled out of organizational process. Then something comes out, and that's being plugged in back to an organizational process. And as Otto pointed out, I mean, these are fully digitally mediated. So. So that's one point, but that's not quite a question yet. So to me, the main takeaway here is actually the rather large positive effect on work creation and then the positive net effect on work. And again, this is a small job market, of course, it's hard to generalize. But So is this end of work discussion completely misplaced? I mean, when we are in Gen I, that's the end of work is the dominant discussion.
Hasn't work been ending or at least moved to China for the past 40 years, and we still end up doing quite a few things here, and obviously there are we have economic textbooks full of theories on why that's the case, on things like related to competitive advantages and those things. I could quite easily tell a competitive advantage story here, where even if I have a China or a generative AI that can do everything better than I can do, it's still the case that probably I would want the generative AI to do the stuff that it's relatively better in, and let me, a puny human, do the things that I'm relatively less worse than the generative AI, even in a story where the generative AI would be better than me at everything I do. So I think that's the summarizing the reason why many economists tend to be quite sort of chill about the future of work, the labor work.
What do you think on that, Fabian?
Yes, I can only agree. So the overall economy is a complex, evolving system. So something is going away, something is coming new to the labor market and to the economy overall. So I think it's a constant replacement. The famous Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter already talked 100 years ago about creative destruction happening. So I think this is creative destruction live. So we see some things being replaced, we see new things coming in. And I also would want to take a rather kind of chill perspective on a technological progress as a good thing. It is something here to help us overall. And think about very ancient times before the invention of the wheel, the poor people who had to bring the stones to building the pyramids, they were probably quite happy to see the wheel taking a lot of their manual work away, even though it meant that some people were potentially replaced. So I think this is just an ongoing process. And now we are just in a process where all of this seems to be a bit overwhelming, which I think is due to the black box nature of AI, because it just looks like magic from the outside.
And also so much quicker. Think about 2 years ago.
Yes.
No one even knew what generative AI is, and now it's all over the news, and we're doing this webinar on that now.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Otto.
Now on the there's several interesting points on this survey of yours and analysis of it. Now, one of the things I found interesting that you have almost as many reserved as you do enthusiasts, and sort of the big masses in the middle, so neither of these groups. So how do you think that works out in an organization? I would think that those groups actually fight themselves out within organizations, and isn't this a major force that actually slows this process down? So we get new releases of new Gen AI services all the time, but it's what matters happens at the organizational level, and that's bound to be a lot slower, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a very important point that we actually wanted to make with this paper. Obviously, this is all based on a survey with online participants. So this is already part of a population that will be rather tempted probably to...
And even in that audience, you get these proportions.
Exactly. Because, for example, we saw this overall AI knowledge and trust overall propensity, and these values were comparable quite high to the overall population. So in a large organization, a large company, if you think about a company or governmental organization with hundreds of thousands of employees potentially in big organizations, I think you will have a hard time in forcing people to just adopt to this technology. And then obviously it would fall short on the promises of more productivity, of save time, if people don't adopt it in the right ways. So this is, I think, why we need to get these people on board. And this is why you really should not just have this one-size-fits-all plain vanilla version. And I mean, probably by now, and everyone here online will have made their own experiences with using ChatGPT potentially. I mean, I cannot speak for everyone here, just for myself. As a researcher, obviously, a lot of things I'm doing is writing, also programming and related kind of tasks. And I use it here and there, but I also have become skeptic about certain elements. And the first kind of enthusiasm flew away. So I think it's very important to clearly emphasize what it can do and where it can do it. Otherwise,
it would be interesting to a follow-up version where you stratify, you get each occupation to do the same survey, and you could then map your factors to the AI exposure things. You could think whether a coder might benefit a lot from using generative AI tools, so they might be more on the optimistic side versus somebody who's, say, a journalist might have more reservation about things like factual correctness and that kind of stuff. So I'd be interested to have a follow-up version on that. I'm not sure how you could recruit across the whole broad range of occupations, but like at least in theory, it would be interesting.
It would probably be lovely if we could take the online labor data we've been using in the other study and stratify by the 3 groups: unaffected, substitution, and augmented, how these people will feel about it.
Another extension I was thinking of, I mean, you sort of said it actually, but your paper is like a cookbook for a manager. I mean, if you want to roll out AI in your organization, you have to be conscious of those groups. And as you sort of pointed in one of the slides, you need to do very different things to motivate them. I mean, are you elaborating on this aspect on your down the road, perhaps as a consultant rather than a researcher?
Potentially, yeah. This is something like more in the discussion and implications section of our paper. But what I would want to say definitely is that, I mean, conducting a survey online, setting one up is not a difficult task. So this is something that at least you could think about as a manager in your organization. If it is a bigger team where you don't know everyone just in person, is maybe, you know, trying to get an assessment about it. So the technologies we have been using for conducting this is not too complicated, even though it might be a bit academic, but at least getting a bit of an understanding of what is going on would definitely help, so that you understand really where are people, and then obviously, as Otto, as you're saying, maybe within the different departments or the different job roles, that would be very important, because otherwise people might be worried and they might be afraid, and then they will be hesitant to actually use the technology that is supposed to help them.
Well, I was thinking of different trajectories. So, I mean, doing a survey for an organization is one line of thinking, but I was thinking that since, based on your evidence, we sort of know that we have these 4 groups, but you need different selling points within organization for a reservist as compared to an enthusiast. I mean, I mean, the way I'm actually following a few rollouts since we work a few Finnish organizations on the issue. But the rollouts I have observed is as if everybody would be an enthusiast. So you should have, based on you, rather 4 rollout strategies than 1.
Yes, and I also want to say, I think the overall debate we are having here within this webinar, which is just a reflection of the overall public debate going on in the media, is pointing towards worries that people have and towards fears. Like Otto said, we don't see evidence on large-scale job loss. So actually, I'm seeing that many people are, probably because obviously these models are quite complicated, and also they are also advertised and marketed in a way that make it appear like magic. So I think as long as people don't really understand what's going on, there will be worries, there will be fears, and this is something that you need to cater. I think both our studies point toward the positive effect this technology could bring about, and that it's not all just worries and fears, but you're absolutely right. So there's this group of enthusiastic individuals. You will see them in big organizations as well as in small ones. So in my research, other than the studies we have been talking about today, I'm looking mostly into startup ecosystem. This is obviously, for example, an environment that is very, you know, friendly towards failure. People are happy to just see the minimum viable product. Maybe a beta version is fine for them. But you really need to cater that there are people who will immediately build up mistrust if it doesn't work as expected. And this is something we have clearly seen over the last 1.5 years that the technology is already about. In the first couple of months, everyone remembers these news articles that were all about hallucinations and where it's kind of leading to wrong results and conclusions. So this is something that needs to be catered, because otherwise people will just be reluctant.
On the black box nature of generative AI tools, one point is also that since we don't exactly know what's going on inside the models, it's also very easy for a Silicon Valley startup to overhype the potential or the potential of what their tools can do, and also thus consequently the potential implications of wide scale adoption of their tools.
Yes.
Which
and what I think is constantly misunderstood is the probabilistic nature of this. So this is like a jazz musician. I mean, if you need somebody to play out of notes, then this is not your IT tool. I mean, you have other tools for that. And that's sort of lost often. And I have actually noticed I misread that in my own use of Gen AI. I mean, it's easy to think that to try to use it as an encyclopedia or search engine, and it's bad at those, and it's good in generating text and so forth. And that distinction is sort of often lost. I mean, it seems like this is a tool that solves everything, but then again, this is an addition to the tools in digital space.
Yeah, I would want to maybe say a word on this. Absolutely. I mean, it's very well known that the overall population, this has been in the research for the last 2 decades or even more, that people struggle with statistical thinking. We saw this particularly in the COVID pandemic, when it was a non-linear process that affected the spread of the pandemic. People couldn't get their head around that, whatever. Like 2-3 days ago, we had only, 10 confirmed cases of COVID, and suddenly we have 10,000. How is this going? And this is because of the non-linear nature and the statistical thinking. This is like an overall phenomenon, not only affecting this technology, but I think it plays out here as well. As you're saying, it is just a prediction of what word, what kind of part of the sentence would come next. So it is just really a top-on of the data that goes into. For example, one of the most important data sets going into the training of ChatGPT is Wikipedia. Obviously, this is by now a trusted and established source. But I want to remember of the times, like maybe also like 2 decades ago, when Wikipedia was new onto the market and everyone was kind of stunned by it. Suddenly you had these encyclopedias that were much bigger than the printed ones, the Encyclopedia Britannica and the big one that everyone had dusting in their bookshelves. And in the early days, people really then just copy-pasted, maybe school kids copy-pasted text from there into their essays, or they wrote them down by then in hand. And teachers needed some time to really understand, oh, this is not something you should do. But now I think no one would really do this anymore. Like it's a standard trick, and there's fact-checking, plagiarism software. So I think similar things will happen with ChatGPT. Now everyone is still stunned, but over time we will just get used to it, as we did with all the other technologies. Also talking about AI, by now, for example, facial recognition is an absolute standard software. We use it in our smartphones every day to collect photo albums of our beloved ones. And in this same way, I think generative AI will also become more normal over time.
So any predictions in looking ahead? I mean, I'm intrigued by the productivity potential here, and in that domain, for instance, you see some crazy numbers, I mean, that I'd find implausible. Then again, I do think there's a productivity potential. So what do you think in looking ahead? Where is this going within labor market or more generally in the economy?
Okay.
I know this is not a comfortable space for us.
Thanks for the easy question. I only have a sample size of one, which is myself. Is that I've the graphs that I showed earlier. I used ChatGPT to do those, and it would have taken a longer time. But like, you know, how many graphs do I do a week? On average, maybe 5. And instead of an hour, I spent 20 minutes on those. So that's like But then again, within that task, that was quite an improvement in productivity. Yeah, indeed, and I continue to be impressed by it, and it's a good tool for that. But at the same time, it's still like I still need to think what goes into the graph and how I interpret that, and that part is still like, unfortunately, I don't get. I've tried getting help from ChatGPT on that, but mostly fails miserably.
Yeah, my view on this is that this novel technology of generative AI is just the most novel development within this overall larger field of digitalization and computerization, which is going on for the last couple of decades. So first of all, obviously, these computers needed to be developed, which happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Then the internet came about, and with it lots of digital services that were adopted at a large scale by people everywhere around. And as a byproduct to these digital services, data came about. And now's the time to really reap the benefits of this data, which is essentially what these tools are doing. So we just talked about Wikipedia as one main source. The other one is Stack Overflow. For those of you in the audience who don't know this platform, it's like the main kind of question-answer platform for programming, and a few other data sets. So this is kind of the catalogs of information that have been created by humans to answer questions in this particular case, and now it could all feed into these AI algorithms, giving better answers to all of this. So I think overall what will happen is that we are not necessarily seeing just a plain replacement of jobs and that's it, but rather we will see more uptake, I believe, of the overall digitalization and programmization of economy. So there's many parts of the overall economy and the world that are not yet digitalized or digitized at all, talking about things like real estate, for example, agriculture, many others. So at the present point in time, the most digitized areas of the economy is things like translation, IT, financial data, these kind of things. And this is obviously because it's easy to be presented in a digital format. It is largely information and there's a lot of money in there. But there's many other fields of the economy where a lot of value can be gained. Obviously, talking about agriculture, for example, particularly in the face of climate change, it would be just great if we had more digital data available and more clever AI algorithms that could then be applied to maximize crop yield and so on and so forth. And you can talk about the same things within HR, within medicine, more personalized, more individualized medicine, and so on and so forth. So the logic will stay the same. Digital data will become available, and then thanks to productivity gains that relieve human beings from doing more tedious, more menial tasks, as is, for example, saving maybe
SEO writers task or something else.
Or maybe 50% on the creation of the graphics. Then a person like Otto could do another analysis. So I think what is happening is the overall expectations people will have to a certain job, they will just increase. But hopefully with that, this overall process of digitalization is going ahead.
Yeah. So if I sort of reinterpret that, so Gen AI is potentially sort of integrative tool here, or sort of perhaps interface to other digital tools, and through this its productivity impact comes about, and on the job aspect, it's like Otto's example and mine as well, and in fact we find that in the literature. It's Gen AI is sort of slices in current occupations, and in they are not removing the occupations, they are improving productivity here and there, and then there's a redirection. So for the broader labor market, so there's adjustment, but I think we are overall on a hopeful note on the future of human work. Might be AI assisted, but plenty for humans to do nevertheless. Did you have something on the audience?
I'm just coming here and telling you that we have no questions. I mean, nobody has asked any questions. We have no comments. So I think it's time to close up this conversation, if it's okay with you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you very much, Fabian, Otto, Petri. Thank you all for watching this. And let me tell you that this research project, AI in the Working Life at Etla, continues this year with some more business cooperation, so stay tuned. Today's Etla Policy Brief is already online, available on our website, so you can load it and read it there. But note, it's in Finnish, so have a great end of the week. Hyvää loppuviikkoa in Finnish kaikille katsojille. See you soon.
Kiitos.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.